I would like to touch base on the culture of your company because it seems like you're pretty light. You joke, you keep everything positive, but at the same time, things have to be pretty, really serious in terms of to hit those growth targets. And then, balancing that with hiring the right people or working with the right people.
Yeah.
How did you go about establishing that culture and continuing to move in the direction that you want to move the company?
I think one of the big pieces of establishing our culture occurred through a very simple question that we started asking in the team a few years into the business when we realized that our culture wasn't what we wanted it to be. And so we started asking this question: who are we when we're actually our best? We all acknowledge that we have good days and bad days. We have days where we're above the line, days when we're below the line, right? And so you start saying, well, when I actually am not ashamed of who I am, and I know that I did a good job as opposed to a really shitty one, what were the attributes that I was able to hold on to for those moments? And as we started asking, folks in our own company this, what started to occur was we started getting answers that were very contradictory to one another, right? So we started getting, for example, one answer that was about authenticity and about being real and about having the capacity to be ourselves. And yet there were often times when we were ourselves and we just spoke our own feelings, that we weren't being empathetic and that we were being jerks, right? And so all of a sudden, this other attribute of, well, yeah, we can be authentic, we can be real, but we can also have this real empathy, for others, and this kind of patience to understand at the same time. And those developed into value sets that began to create tension and oppose one another, right? There was this other value set where, most of us coming from athletic backgrounds, we're very performance oriented, we're very driven, and, we liked having structure, accountability, and process. At the same time, like you mentioned, I'm a pretty casual dude and pretty loosey-goosey at times and more of a dreamer. And, I like to have a certain amount of space and freedom. And so we started realizing that each of us needed one another to hold each other accountable, that there was this idea of being able to ask for help and that you couldn't rest this whole company on one person. And another value set of doing this together came up. And as we started to define these value sets and as we started to make decisions based upon this value set, as opposed to just our business goals, we started to find that we were a lot more consistent in the way that we broke ties. Meaning that you always come to a point in a business where you have to make a decision to go left or right. And all the pros and all the cons seem to match each other from an intellectual or a business standpoint. When you come to those ties, if you can break them consistently based on a belief system or on value sets, then all of a sudden people in your own company and your customers see you behave in a very consistent way. And whatever that is, that develops trust. It's not that you have to be one way or another way. You have to be a consistent way, right? You have to be a way that people can understand. And as we started to be a consistent way, I think that's when our culture really started to develop. And I would characterize our culture as being a curious one, a culture where we want to try to get better, a culture based around self-improvement and based around learning. And it's also a culture based around hospitality and service, trying to do our best to take care of others.
Real quick, a quick follow up on that, because as we're coming close to the 60-minute mark, one of the things I actually dreamt about this Sunday night.
Oh,
so you talked about the should culture. So for those that aren't aware, we send a questionnaire out to folks that are going to be guests so that we can kind of follow an outline of what our guests want to talk about. And one of the questions that is asked is, why should somebody listen? And Allen came back and checked us on that and was like,
greatest answer ever.
Oh man, I like to the point, and I love being challenged. And you challenged me to the point where I legitimately dreamt about it, and it was like, man, we got to change this. So, can you touch on the word "should" and the "should" culture that you've instilled within Skratch Labs?
I got triggered by that question because I got triggered by the word "should." And there are three grammatical mood states in the English language. There is the indicative, where you just point something out, like, oh, that dog pooped on the ground. There is the imperative, where there's a sense of urgency and chaos in it, where you're like, oh my God, the dog pooped on the ground, right? And then there is the subjunctive mood state, which is the most powerful mood state, which is what's also known as the imaginary mood state, where we're like, what if the dog pooped on the ground, right? And we can imagine and dream. While imagining and dreaming is probably one of the most important qualities that we have as human beings, there is both a positive subjunctive as well as a negative subjunctive. And the negative subjunctive is when we find ourselves mired in imaginary fear, in regret, in complaint. And so there's this adage that the real danger is imagined, not real, right? That we make things up in our heads all the time. And the word should is a really, really interesting and bizarre placeholder for the negative subjunctive mood, meaning that we say should when we are in a state of inaction or impasse. We say should when we bump into someone at the grocery store and we're like, hey, we should get together. And we have no intent to ever follow through on that, right? The military did this linguistic study where they found that one of the words that predicted mission failure was the word should. Should we attack? Should we not attack? Should we negotiate for peace? Well, that's a very different statement than we are negotiating for peace, right? Whenever I want to say should, and this is something that is part of our ethos at Skratch, whenever somebody on my team wants to say should, I challenge them by asking them, what are you really trying to communicate, right? Is there something that you intend to have as an outcome, right? And what ends up happening is that you either, don't say anything or you reframe what your real intents are. And I'm really proud of the fact that at Skratch, nowhere in any of our written documentation, etc., do we ever use the word should. I think it's so challenging, but if you challenge yourself for a day to correct that language, it's incredible what happens. It's incredible how much you let go of in some ways, right? Like, there should be more parking at my Whole Foods parking lot. Right? It is what it is, right? I'm going to ride my bike next time.
No, I dig that. And as soon as Tim had sent me the questionnaire, I saw your response. And Tim has talked about the word should and coulds and all that stuff before. So it really, it was interesting to reflect on that. And I'm glad that was able to be relayed here.
Directly involved within the startup community for almost a decade, I want to talk to you about a serious pain point. Spending a ton of time trying to understand the business landscape in the 757. That's time that should be focused on growing the business. At StartWheel, we're here to help you by compiling all of the news you need to know about in one place. Now there's no need to search multiple websites. Just head to startwheel.org and see for yourself. That's startwheel.org.